Okay, so it looks like we're live now. Welcome to the last event for the Digital Writers Festival 2015. We're talking about data journalism. So we're just going to start out with a couple of introductions, and then we're going to go and define data journalism, or attempt to define it. We'll talk about the purpose and the audience that it aims to target itself to, challenges posed to it, and how we can improve it. And then we'll talk about how we can learn data journalism or where we can teach it. And then each of us is going to talk about some of our favourite pieces. And then we'll open the floor to questions. So, with that in mind, I'm Michelle Sato. I am a freelance writer and journalist. I was the editor of Virago magazine at the University of Melbourne in 2014, so last year, and that's where I got my start in data journalism. I made a bunch of infographics for the magazine then, for web and for print. And I'm a big Nate Silver fan. So, Brody?
My turn.
Introduce yourself.
Yeah. How do I do that? No. I'm Brody Carmody. I am a journalist at Private Media, specifically at Startup Smart and Smart Company, covering tech startups in Australia and also small businesses. And last year I was an editor of RMIT student magazine Catalyst. And so that's how sort of I got my start in data journalism. We sort of did one or two sort of projects, and I'm starting to work on a project now for Startup Smart. So least qualified out of you three to be on this panel, but I'm sort of making my start to sort of journalism and data, and so I think that's the exciting thing about it, is that anyone can sort of do it and get involved. So yeah, for me.
Okay, Liam?
Cool. Hi guys, my name's Liam Mannix, and I'm currently a journalist.
Liam?
We've lost Liam.
I am a cadet, one of the new intake for... Am I here? Hello? Hello?
No, you're on. Okay.
You're good.
Am I here?
Yes.
I'm so sorry, you guys. Where do I get up to? I'm a cadet journalist with The Age for this year, and I got my start in Adelaide, where I studied. I did just a normal degree in journalism and moved over to a small paper called The Independent Daily, which was a wholly online publication. And I was lucky enough there to have an editor who had a lot of faith in me and said, okay, we've got a space here where we can try new things and experiment and fail, and it's okay to stuff up. So he let me dip my feet into data journalism. He also let me play around with the... So we produced some really great stuff. We won sort of attention. Now I've moved over Brown's person, and also with The Age's established data journalism team, which is an extraordinarily eye-opening experience, because while I'm young and still learning this game, these are the professional guys who have been doing this for a long time, and it's pretty amazing where data journalism has come in only a few years.
Great. Okay, so let's talk about definitions of data journalism. How does either of you define what data journalism is? Liam, did you want to start?
Yeah, look, it's a really interesting question, isn't it? Because data journalism, I think, has... I don't know, I don't want to use the word fad, because it's an area that I think does extraordinary things, is really valuable, but also in the last few years it's become a buzzword. We talk about it, we get really excited about it, and in a lot of the way that's because of, you know, the role that the Guardian and the New York Times have had in bringing to the public these extraordinary visualizations and interactives, things that you haven't seen traditional journalism do before, and people look at them on the web and they go, wow, that's totally amazing. I didn't know we could do this. This is a new, stunning way of doing things. But it's interesting that that's happened and that is a new rise. And, we even see that reflected in changes to the Walkley categories and that sort of stuff. But at the same time, I think that there is a tendency with data journalism to also run away with it and get carried away a little bit with what the web can do and all of these extraordinary new technologies that we've got. The reality, I think, is that data journalism is a very old field. Journalists have been playing with data forever. In fact, when you look at a story, it's full of data, just a normal one. It's full of facts and quotes, and these are pieces of data. We've now started to play more and more with numbers. We've got journalists who are not only computer literate but numerate, which my understanding is pretty rare for journalists. And so we're seeing this field which was always a bit of journalism, which was always certainly a part of journalism, really come into its own and really come to prominence. So I think it's an odd definition, and I do a bit of data journalism, and I'm still not entirely sure what it means. Should it be that I should be doing complex maths? Should it be that I should be doing pretty visualizations? Should it be that data journalism really should just
Liam?
I wonder if we've lost Liam.
Oh.
Talking about what data journalism is, that we lost him.
Yeah. Brody, did you have anything to add? Oh, wait.
Story.
Liam?
I'd be really interested to know what Brody. Sum up, I'm not entirely sure what data journalism is. I have done some interesting bits and pieces of it, but I wouldn't have a good definition of the field as a whole. So I'd love to know your thoughts.
Yeah, I think Liam's totally right in saying that data journalism has certainly become a bit of a buzzword in the past few years. I think that journalism has always involved data. You only need to look at business reporting. That's always involved numbers and data from turnover to staff numbers to that sort of thing. Election reporting is another good example of how that has always been embedded in journalism, and also bit of an odd one, but I think also sports reporting as well. Dealing with thing. So so I think you can ask what data journalism is, but I think that asking what journalism is, and the answer is that no one really knows. Things that you are able to define such things. For me, it's just more about getting out there and telling entertaining the public interest through data and numbers and the visualization of that data. That's what I would say. It's more about the fact that we've had a digital revolution and that we have access to so much more data than we had before. I don't know the exact numbers, but there's just like an immeasurable amount of data that is created every hour. This Channel 9 television current affairs program, we'd probably say that there was an Olympic-sized swimming pool full of data created. I don't know. I think it's less about what data journalism is and the fact that it's already here, and that we as journalists and for the people watching this and people interested in getting involved or trying out a bit of journalism, just to understand that it is already here, and it's more about what we're doing about it and how we're tackling it. Because the more that we ask the question and the less doing and tackling those big problems that we could be solving, and those complex ideas that we could be conveying to audiences in a really entertaining new way.
Yeah, I suppose that's the other key way that I think about data journalism. We need to not lose sight of the fact that it's journalism at its heart. And if you're going to do something in data journalism that you're simply doing because it's data journalism, that you wouldn't do if it was just normal journalism, then I think you should be questioning whether that's actually journalism at all. So, I suppose when I look at data journalism, I'm not entirely sure what it is, but I want to make sure that everything that I do is still really strongly related back to the point of journalism, which is to inform and to break news stories and to hold people accountable?
Yeah, and I don't know what you think as well, Michelle, but just quickly while I have this brainwave is that for me, data journalism is just journalism, and it's about telling the stories, and it's kind of interesting that the data is in front of the word journalism. Journalism is more important. The story is more important, and data journalism in a way is just perhaps the best way of telling a story. Obviously, we have the pyramid format, which was because, you know, we had newspapers and limited space, and so you just sort of had to get all the important information at the top, whereas, you know, these days we read everything on screens. So I don't know, what do you think, Michelle? Do you reckon that data journalism is, you know, more about journalism, or do you reckon that it's still important to have that numbers and facts aspect?
Well, I think that usually when you see data visualizations anyway, they're kind of to accompany stories. There's a written story there, and then there's kind of an infographic that comes next to it. So yes, they're pretty much just to support the story that's already there. But they do make the news kind of more accessible, and they enable people to get a better idea of what's happening with these facts and figures, rather than just kind of reading a slab of writing. You can see it sort of visually, and that's usually more appealing. Which brings me to our next point. What's the purpose of data journalism, and how does it kind of appeal to its audiences? What are its audiences?
Well, I think Brodie and I probably, it sounds like we agree a lot on this, in that the point of data journalism is it's just another way of doing journalism. And too often, you know, there is a critique that you often hear of data journalism that it can sometimes be a bit too flashy. We can sometimes get really excited by these web technologies and do these exciting graphics, but you've got to be really careful that you're still doing journalism, that you're still telling a story that people need to know. And yeah, you, as Brodie pointed out, you probably also need to ask about the medium that you're telling it in. Is data journalism the best way to tell this story that you want to tell? One of the examples that comes to mind is a piece that, well, it's two pieces that I did for the Independent Daily. So the first piece was built off a database of all of the names of all of the children born in South Australia for 100 years. And we put together this program that allowed you to put your name in, and you could see your name's popularity over time. And people flocked to it. You know, it got a huge amount of hits, and people were fascinated by this thing. But I wouldn't call that journalism. It's, you know, it was a fun bit of toying around that you can do with data. But does it tell a deeper story? Does it break news or hold anybody accountable? I don't think it does. On the other end of the spectrum, we wanted to look at whether live entertainment was in decline in South Australia, and so we found a database of entertainment permission, which is the planning permission that you need to show that, to allow you to have live music at your pub or at your venue. And we were able to compare that to another database of planning permission for pubs, and you could see that about 20 or 30 years ago, there was this huge spike in pubs that were approved, and at the same time there was this huge drop-off in pubs that had entertainment consent. And that was, I was really proud of the team for that piece, because that was a piece that said, that was a piece that broke news, that broke important news, that told people something they didn't know, and that sort of proved up to my editor, certainly, that data journalism was valuable, because it's an important story to tell that we couldn't have told without data journalism. So I guess that's how I would, I think that's where the role of data journalism is perhaps best, when it's telling those stories that you couldn't tell any other way. What do you think, Brodie?
Nice segue there. Yeah, the analogy that I use when sort of asking and figuring out what the audience or purpose of data journalism is to sort of take a look at other examples, and that is, you know, in the tech startup scene, a lot of entrepreneurs and software developers sort of get really wrapped up and excited about the apps that they're creating, the websites they're building, and yeah, just simply for the sake of it, rather than the problem that they're solving and how it relates back to a mass market or a problem that they could make lives easier. So I think it's important to take the same approach with data journalism, and that is not to get lost in the pretty pictures and visualizations, but to actually keep that audience in mind. In saying that, I don't think there's any hard and fast answer, but I think a really interesting purpose for data journalism is that it's much easier for policymakers and for people in power, whether that be in business or in politics, to argue with someone in a newspaper and to just simply dismiss that as opinion. But it's much harder to argue with numbers and facts, albeit obviously in context and that sort of thing. But so I think that's one way, and one purpose that can be really powerful is to bring those issues and crunch the numbers and put that to policymakers rather than a lobby group or a he said, she said argument. And in some way, maybe that can build trust back into the newsroom and the thought.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, let's keep going with this. What are some other ways that we can kind of meet these challenges, and what other kind of challenges are there that are posed to data journalism? So I suppose, people are always concerned about funding for journalism generally. Do we think that people want to keep funding data projects?
Liam, you might be able to answer that one. Does it want to keep pouring money into its data journalism?
Look, I mean, as far as I can see, only being new at this organisation, the Age has a really strong commitment to it, which is one of the reasons that I was so attracted to work for this paper. They've got a couple of full-time data journalists who are extraordinarily talented, and we've got some more with our other publication, the Sydney Morning Herald up in Sydney, again, who are really talented and doing some really amazing stuff. I think that amongst the mainstream mastheads, there is at the moment a bit of an appetite for data journalism, which is really exciting for me. As I said earlier, I don't know how long that'll last. I don't know if the skills that I've got will always be in demand. At the moment, I'm enjoying it, but certainly the Age and the Sydney Morning Herald have got big data journalism teams. Around the world, we can see it. The New York Times and the Guardian have got huge teams, and our competitors have got them. News Corp have got data journalism teams, and so have the Oz. And what's interesting about that plurality of teams is that they're all sort of working differently because all of their newspapers have different voices. I personally am fascinated to see how the tabloids, the Murdoch tabloids, their data journalism resources, because obviously their storytelling is a little different to the way that Fairfax tells its stories. So I'm going to be fascinated to see how you might do data journalism for a mass audience, because at the moment it is perhaps a little niche. So, yeah, in terms of funding, I think that we're probably doing okay, but you come from a more
You might have to repeat yourself.
Liam, you cut out there. Could you ask that question again? I come from a...
Oh, sorry. I was just asking Brody if he felt there was a sense of support for data journalism from his employer.
Yeah, I mean, is like a sort of independent sort of news organisation that runs organisations. So in comparison to mastheads like the Sydney Morning Herald, the Age, and the Australian, we're quite small, but there's definitely a commitment, and I'm working on a project at the moment for Startup Smart. It's in the can't quite talk a whole great deal about it because things might change and as we go. But so one of the things that
Brody, give us something. Give us something.
Give us the goss. Give us the dirt. So basically, at the moment, Australia has one of the sort of lowest government sort of support, I guess, at the federal level for tech startups, in comparison to countries like, I don't know, like Finland and Israel, which have quite strong economies. And so one of the answers to that is to have tech accelerators, and one or two in Adelaide. The majority of them are in Sydney and Melbourne. And what they do is take on entrepreneurs who have an idea for, say, like an app or a website, whether it be like a little baby or Uber, obviously at the idea stage of the spectrum, and then give them some seed funding, so some money to start that, and as well as access to mentors and that sort of thing. Some of them also ask for a stake in the company, so some of them might give you, say, $10,000 and say like a 6% stake in the company. And so what we're doing is looking at all the different in Australia, and we're trying to work out the success rate of those companies, where they are sort of 3, 4, 5 years from now, that time, how many employees they have, the gender breakdown. So, and that's quite exciting because no one else is really reporting much starting to financial review, and the Australians sort of pay attention to it now that they've got Neil Mann or Young, I think, down from New York. But to an industry that's really growing, and I mean, obviously, Liam, from your perspective, coming from Adelaide, is really important to Australia's future because, as we know, the automotive industry and sort of prime industry is the future. So yeah, but I mean, as for how, what was the question, Michelle? Like how data journalism could be improved? Was that the original?
Well, it was more about the challenges, but I guess yeah, we can talk about that as well.
So I think challenges. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely support from my my employer when it comes to data journalism, because there hasn't been data journalism in terms of business reporting, which is unfortunate because there's so much resources out there. If you think of the BRW rich list, there's so much information there, and Smart Company does a similar thing, where they do sort of a roundup of the 50 small to medium-sized enterprises in the most, and we also gather so much information from them as well, among other things. So there's so much information there that we can tap into and sort of, you know, look for trends and that sort of thing. But I think the hurdles of how it can be improved is maybe news organizations could be a little bit risk adverse, particularly in this current environment. I mean, we're shared left, right, and center, and advertisers sort of finding other means of spending their cash. And so I think one of the challenges is to get the right people in the organization into those positions, and to not sort of cut the funding and get rid of it. Tiny little kind of something maybe not going wrong, which you know, might happen, say, in the corporate world, and you'd cut the program altogether. But I think it's about being lean and having that startup mentality of just sort of trial and error and getting it right, because it's sort of a new field, whether we like it or not. That's my man's opinion.
Cool. How did you guys learn to do data journalism, I guess? Like, where did you kind of gain the skills to do that, and where can our audience kind of learn to do it if they're interested?
Liam, do you want to tackle that?
Okay. Look, it is a hard thing. Data. Some of the skills. I mean, there are a whole bunch of different things that you can learn to play with. I probably, it's a weird story, but I accidentally enrolled in an Excel spreadsheet course while I was in high school, and it was the worst unit that I've ever done. It was taught by like a 65-year-old lady, and it was just the most dreadful. Oh god! And it has actually come in handy now. Like I can use Excel and write formulas and do all this stuff, and most, you know, and so people will send me their data and say, hey, can you help me out with this? So so that's handy. So to circle back to answer your question, I think the first thing you need is you probably need pretty good computer literacy. Most data journalism tools require a really high degree of that. You're going to be, messing around with spreadsheets and problem solving and fiddling with tools that are generally quite badly built and your own code, really, once you get further along with it. So I would say to people, first of all, decide if that's you. Decide if you actually want to learn those skills, because they are effort. And like me, I'm only one step up the mountain. I've learned some basic tools that are really handy, and I'm good with Excel, but the coding stuff is still so difficult, and I can barely do that. I'm only still learning that, and that's the bit where data journalism really becomes amazing. How would I encourage you to learn? I think that the best way to, well, the way that I did it was I wanted to build, I had a set of data that I wrote into a story, and it was quite dull. It didn't really tell the story I was looking for it to tell. It was about population sizes and population movements. And I said, 5% reduction here, 10% increase over there. And I was like, well, that's how you do the story. But I wanted to do it with a map. I wanted to have a map showing where people had moved from and those sort of things. And I'd sort of been messing around with other websites on the internet and seeing that journalists were doing these amazing heat maps, they're called. And so that's what I wanted to do. And I said, I want to do that. And so I just started. And it took me about a month to work out what piece of technology could do what I wanted. And in the end, I built this really basic map that now looks terribly embarrassing, but it was my first published piece of data journalism, and I was really pleased with it. And from there, I've just, maybe that's the way I learn. I've gone from problem to problem and said, right, so I want to do this. What tools do I need to learn to be able to do it? And it's accumulated, if you learn that way, in about a couple of weeks ago for The Age, we built a map of every Airbnb house in Melbourne, and we were able to show that they were actually run by these networks of large renters. And to do that, you had to use a tool that programmatically extracted data from Airbnb. You had to use Excel to convert that data into something usable and to analyze it, and then you had to use mapping software to get it out there and display it to people. So you need a lot of stuff in your kit bag to be a good data journalist, but to start, you don't. You just need one tool. So work out what it is you want to do. Make it something simple. Go find the tool that will let you do it, and then learn how to do that tool. And once you've mastered that tool, you can go on to the next tool, and you'll be able to combine those tools together and go from there. So yeah, I suppose that'd be my advice. Jump into it if you think you're computer literate and you like this stuff and you've got an interest, and then start at the shallow end of the pool. Learn a tool, learn the next tool, slowly build up from there. That'd be my advice.
Awesome. Brody, any tips for audience members that might want to be interested in data journalism?
Yeah, well, as someone who's just sort of diving into it to begin with, so sort of at the very bottom of that journey, I would say, yeah, just to go out and do it, because sometimes with these sorts of things, like learning a language or like when you're a journalist learning shorthand, like it can seem impossible at the start. You just get out there and start doing it and chipping away. That's going to start. I think for like my experience, a way to sort of take baby steps into it was to get involved in student media. So I think anyone who happens to be involved with the student magazine or is perhaps at university and whose university has a student publication to get involved, because there's a wealth of data out there at university, and it's not often looked at. And it might even just be the case that you have a spreadsheet and then you work with the designer of the student magazine to make something like a little graph or something like that. Like it, you don't necessarily have to learn to code, but that's what I'm actually hoping to do, and is obviously very helpful if you want to get really high up in that sort of field. But yeah, I think the thing to remember as well is that newsrooms are collaborative organizations, and I think that's another hurdle with data journalism, is that not everyone is the sum of all human knowledge, and so something that perhaps have a little bit more in Newsrooms is for sort of like the product team who are responsible for making sure that the website is functional and developing, certain more closely with the journalists, and they understand their jobs a little bit better, and vice versa. And so, you can always go to that person. They don't often have much spare time, just as journalists don't have much spare time. But I think, it's important to understand that you don't have to know everything from the start. I would really encourage people enroll in. I think there's a free online course that you can do. I think it's journalism with data journalism course into Google. I think there's a free one that comes up, and I think it's run by the Canvas Network or something like that, which do sort of online tutorials. And you certainly won't learn how to code like a master by the end of it. You'll just sort of get a bit of background about data journalism and the free resources that you can use from there. And that's a really good starting point. So I'd really encourage people, if they're interested, to do that, as well as maybe read some of the few really good sort of data journalism projects, so like at The Age or the New York Times, regarding and just sort of stories that are coming out of there, and just sort of think of your own.
There are also a couple of websites where you can make infographics for free. PictoChart and Infogram are the ones that I know. I don't know if you guys know of any others. But, or even if you just Google like DIY data journalism, I'm sure it'll come up. Okay. So what are some of our favourite pieces of data journalism that we've seen around the place? Liam?
Look, I should probably give a shout out to a couple of people. First of all, at the big end of town is everything the New York Times has done. And I was, really, just everything. And I was amazed by them. And I was playing around with a JavaScript library to do some visualizations the other day. And my data journalism editor came over to me and said, "Oh yeah, that piece of technology." And I was like, "Yeah, the New York Times uses it." And he's like, "Yeah, the New York Times went out and hired the guy who invented that to come and work for their data journalism team." So that's the level of resource difference that we're playing at. We're messing around with this stuff. The New York Times, when it wants to do data journalism, goes and hires the genius web architect. So everything that they've done is worth looking at, but with the realization that it is very difficult to replicate. I suppose the guy who I admire most at The Age, and I would probably say he would be the best in Australia, or that there are plenty of good data journalists, is Mark Moncrief. He's done a couple of really amazing pieces. The first one he did used MySchool, which is that website that collates all of the school recordings, how good every school is. And the guys who designed that built it specifically so that you couldn't compare schools. The idea being to obscure that comparison. Now, we looked at that and said, well, that's unreasonable. If they have this data, we ought to be able to compare these and say, here are the schools that are struggling, and here are the ones that are doing well, and why? Is it because they're receiving more government funding, or what's going on there? So the way that he fixed that was he gathered a large group of young people and had them go through each page on this MySchool website and enter and scrape each school's data. And it was this extraordinary effort that involved, I think, 50 people and 3 days' time at The Age's Media House office, and it produced this extraordinary story with all of this data, which the government had gone to such lengths to obscure from us. So that was amazing. He also did a piece where he had, it's hard to even explain, but he had a bunch of people who were in detention whose names and records were quite obscured and had been broken down into different pieces to obscure their case history and their lives and what impact they'd had with Australia and the interfaces they'd have with the Australian government. And he built a program that put together all of these scattered pieces of documents into one story for each of these people, each of these lost people who are hidden from the Australian people by the government, and he was able to tell you about them, in a way that the government deliberately tried to obscure. So I thought both of those pieces were extraordinary, and they both fulfilled that thing that I think is important about data journalism, which is that it was journalism. It told stories that were important, that had an impact, and that couldn't have been told otherwise without data journalism. So I suppose he is the guy who really impresses me in Australia.
Okay, Freddie?
How can I add to that? I think definitely the New York Times and the Guardian are sort of the guys to watch. ProPublica also do some really cool stuff. When you sort of look at their stuff, you do have to realize that the Guardian sort of had the funds to hire the person who co-developed Twitter to work on their data journalism project. So by no means are you sort of able to sort of feel like a stand-alone person wanting to get into data journalism. So I think in that regard, some of my favorite pieces are actually data journalism tell local stories. So for example, I think sort of halfway or / towards the end of last year, The Age's Craig Butt, I think, did this really cool data project where he mapped out, with help from other people, obviously, all the languages in Melbourne that are languages other than English. And so, I mean, that's really important from a policy perspective and also just a human interest perspective as well, to show how diverse Melbourne is and how it's benefited from things. So I think my favorite data journalism stories are, the Guardian sort of cracking down on government spending and which politician has paid for what, but the spectrum, my favorite data journalism projects are the ones that tell stories, such as the most dangerous intersections, that a local paper might whip up based on just Google Maps and a few statistics, or stuff based on local council data. I think is also really, really great and important. Just my favorite data journalism.
Yep. I think there's also quite a few new kind of small media startups that are doing a lot of good things in data journalism. 538 is really good. Nate Silver's site. So yeah, I mean, we were talking about sports data journalism a little bit before, and 538 actually has really, really good sport, but it is American, so it's interesting if you like American sport.
It's a weird thing, isn't it? We're almost playing catch up to our sports brothers who just have this extraordinary data journalism embedded in pretty much every paper that covers sport, and that's this obsession with statistics. I was reading the other day that they've just installed motion tracking cameras in every NBA stadium, so they'll be able to get, not NBA, basketball, so they'll be able to get live player data for every second, or for every player, for every game. And, it's producing petabytes of data for each match, but that's the level that sport has gotten to. And I can only wonder if, one day we're going to get to that sort of level where journalists will be insisting that the government install trackers on buses and stuff and provide us with the data, because data journalism is so mainstream.
Well, I think in data journalism, like anything else, it's important for the users at large to play to their strengths, and I think maybe that's an area that Australia can really sort of drive forward is, our sports innovation and just because we're a nation of people who love their sport. So, maybe you've identified the next /buzzword, Liam.
Okay. Now we've got a little bit of time for questions. So if you do have a question, just tweet it to #DWF15 and we'll ask our panelists. We have one from Connor Thomas O'Brien. Can we find any of Liam Mannix's database work for InDaily online?
Yeah, you still can. Some of my very early stuff is very embarrassing. But there's some really good stuff out there as well that I'm quite proud of. I think the piece that I would encourage you to have a look at, rather than all the embarrassing pieces, is a piece that was called Poly Tracker. You should be able to find it just by Googling InDaily Poly Tracker. and it was a database that we built from extracting every action that was recorded in South Australia's Hansard, and we were able to put up a visual display of everything that these politicians had done for the last year, and you could see that some of them had been really busy and some had just done nothing at all. So that one's there, and I'll make sure I tweet that out at the end of this.
Cool. Please tweet your earlier work, Liam.
No.
Come on, air the laundry.
I'll do that, and you can have my baby photos as well, right?
Excellent, great.
So, yes, Brody, you have a question.
Yeah, I was wondering what you guys were thinking in terms of, I was really interested before to sort of have that conversation about what problems we see at the moment with data journalism and sort of how we can go about solving them. And we all agree that it's awesome, but how can we, I guess, move it forward for the better in Australia where, you know, we, as Liam was saying, we are sort of playing catch up with America and Britain.
Well, it's really interesting, Brody. Since coming to the Age, I did not realise how significant the shift in mobile news reading is from desktop computers to mobile. And, you know, like the news industry has only just been learning how to deal with people coming to it on desktop computers. And so data journalism has lots of tools that are really good if you're looking at something on, you know, a screen that is at minimum the size of a laptop and, you know, hopefully much bigger. But the explosion of mobile news reading is such that data journalism now needs to actually really look at it and say, how do what we do fit into that? And the scary thing about this is data journalism is wonderfully graphic, or data visualization as a component of data journalism is really graphic, you know, tableaus and maps, but they don't work as well at the moment on a small screen. And that is something that the data journalism around the country and the professional data journalists are really thinking about. How do we build stuff that works for the smaller screen? And as yet, I don't quite have an answer to that, but it's going to be a real challenge. Although, you know, I suppose it's not any greater a challenge than the challenge that is faced by journalism at large, because we're all going to have to switch over to mobile, and screen sizes are much tinier and attention spans are much shorter. So it's a really interesting challenge that we're facing right now, and data journalism faces it as much as anyone.
Cool.
We've got another question on Twitter from Tess Neugebauer. I hope I pronounced that right. What do you find most beneficial about data journalism?
Do you want to go first, Brendan?
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I guess what I find most beneficial about data journalism is it just focuses on a way of telling a story. So, yeah, I mean, for example, something that we did last year at Catalyst was did a sort of baby data journalism project. We didn't really know what we were doing, really. But we were about university enrollments at RMIT, because the university had been claiming that its enrollments for socioeconomics had gone up sort of in the past handful of years due to sort of the changes of the Labor government that what they're doing. So I think they were like fully implemented in about 2012. So we took a look at that and through that there had been more students from low socioeconomic backgrounds enrolling in RMIT since sort of the sort of education university had been doing. And so it's a really good way of, I guess, fact-checking and looking at data and also bringing that to light rather than just relying on what somebody is saying. I think the other thing too that's really important is that data journalism, I mean, you're working with data, right? So you can see both the good and bad sides of it and provide the context. So, for example, the other thing that came to light with this data journalism project was that RMIT was basing its data on what it finds for socioeconomic students and what those indicators were, and the sole indicator was that it defined low socioeconomic students based on their postcode, which, as we know, is problematic because, you know, I'm from regional northeast Victoria, and so, you know, people those socioeconomic backgrounds move to go to university. Like, country can't necessarily study at Melbourne University or RMIT by taking the train in 3-4 hours a day. So yeah, so it kind of, that doesn't just show that there was a conflict with the data and that in a way it didn't tell the full story, if that makes sense, which I'm not sure would have came to light if we hadn't sort of dug up that data and looked at it for ourselves. I don't know whether that answered the question, but I think, yeah, that's just sort of a first-hand experience that I had.
Okay. Okay, Liam, what do you find most beneficial about data journalism?
Look, I totally agree with Brody. I mean, the thing that I love about data journalism is that it lets you tell important stories that you couldn't tell otherwise, you know. And I didn't get issues over here, but I think I heard you talking about schools and school entry, and we did a very similar thing here with one of our projects, which we won an award for. We looked at the way that Adelaide's universities admitted students based on low socioeconomic factors. So what they did was they gave points out, and they said, well, you're from a lower socioeconomic school, so we'll give you additional points. Now, we...
No, the lag.
That database, and we took database. Guys? Have I gone away?
You're back now, I think.
I'm back. Oh, bloody hell. Sorry.
You were looking at school and university entrance data. And
yes, yeah. So the universities publish a list of schools that if you go to, they will give you additional bonus points because they consider you to be from a lower socioeconomic area. We compared that to actual socioeconomic data published by the government and found that there was no correlation at all. In fact, some of South Australia's richest private schools with the richest pupils were receiving low socioeconomic points. And we were able to put that to a university source. We tied in data journalism with traditional story-breaking journalism, and the source said to us, yes, you're right. About 10 years ago, the marketing department marched into the equity department's office and said, hey, we're going to administer those bonus points instead of you. It's not going to be about equity anymore. It's going to be about getting students to come to our university. And that was a really important story. It reformed the way bonus points were offered in South Australia, which we were really proud of. And again, it was a story that you couldn't tell without data journalism. So, for me, that and the live music piece was one of those ones that made me go, yeah, this is a field worth being in, because you can tell important stories that you couldn't tell otherwise.
Yeah, definitely. I think another one of the benefits of data journalism is that it translates data that can sometimes be complex and difficult to wrap your head around into something that's a little more accessible, and it makes people able to understand it or even just to be aware of it. And I mean, that's something that's really good as well, and that's what most journalism aims to do. But sometimes when it comes to, really heavy kind of number-based information, it's really, really hard to kind of break it down. And so when you have things that are like data visualization, it's really helpful for people to be able to kind of understand it by reading it.
Yeah, that's something that I'm facing like each and every day as a business journalist, in that, often a lot of the time, how do I know that the audience that I'm writing this for, perhaps outside of business owners and entrepreneurs and people who understand what it's about, and for some of the bigger issues or sort of fun topics, for example, maybe I don't know, it will sort of make it easier for people to sort of understand and read those important stories or fun stories. So yeah, I think that's a good thing. To journalism, the better. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Have we got any more questions?
Maybe not. Okay, well, if there are no other questions. If you do come up with any questions, you can post them in the hashtag DWF15, and I guess we'll keep an eye out for them. Or you can tweet at us. Our Twitter handles are on the DWF page. And yeah, but is there anything else that either of you want to add? Any last kind of points about data journalism?
No, look, that was great. I really enjoyed listening to Brody. You sound like you're doing some really cool stuff.
Hopefully, I'm only just learning, so like I don't really know. Like I don't know. To be honest, I don't really know how to code. Like the most I've done is sort of a few student media projects last year, and I've downloaded Tableau Public onto my MacBook.
Learn Tableau. It's the best.
Yeah, so like I'm sort of like at the very, very bottom of the hill, but yeah, Michelle was saying, I think, if anyone out there is interested, do just tweet at us, and we're happy to sort of point you in a direction that may hopefully be helpful. But yeah, I think yeah, that's pretty much just all I had to say.
Awesome. Well, we hope you've enjoyed our discussion of data journalism, rounding off the Digital Writers Festival of 2015. Thanks for joining us. That's the end.
Thanks for listening, guys.
Bye.